Hello, everybody, and welcome to Gript Media. My name is John McGuirk. I'm the editor, and we are today going to have a conversation about the news story that's been gripping the nation for the last 3 weeks, really. That being the civil rape case involving Conor McGregor and Nikita Hand, where yesterday a jury awarded €250,000 worth of damages to Miss Hand on the basis that they agreed with her that Conor McGregor had assaulted her, specifically raped her, in a hotel in Dublin in 2018. I am joined today by two guests who know a lot about this trial. One, because she sat through every moment of it. That is Gript Media's own Fatima, who was in court for every day of the trial, up until and including the verdict yesterday, and covered it in some depth for our publication. And my other guest is also a Gript Media contributor, but has her own expertise because she is a former barrister who worked on many criminal cases in the UK and is somebody who's very knowledgeable when it comes to matters of the law. And that is Miss Laura Perrins. Thank you both for joining us.
No problem.
Fatima, I'm going to start with you. 2 weeks, more than 2 weeks, 12 days, a verdict, jury deliberations. As you're reflecting back on this, what is the moment that sticks with you most from the trial? What's the sort of vignette or the scene that you'll carry with you moving forward?
Just full disclosure, I actually missed the first day of it, so I wasn't there for that. But I think that the moment that had the biggest impact on me, if I can choose one, because it was an extremely graphic trial and, something that it was very difficult to sit through. I know that, I wasn't the only one that felt that way. But I think that perhaps when there was CCTV evidence played to the court, I think there was about 47 minutes, I think, in all. And this evidence basically captured where, Conor McGregor comes to the salon where Nikita Hand worked, where she and Danielle Keeley were waiting for him on the morning of the 9th of December. And after Nikita said that Conor raped her, which the court has now accepted happened, she said that she woke up beside him in the bed in the Beacon Hotel, and that she didn't know at that point, that she couldn't remember what had happened, but that she knew she had been out for a long time and she was worried about her boyfriend at the time, Steve, that he didn't know where she was, or he wouldn't have heard from her for a long time. So she said that she got up, went over to her bag, took her phone and texted him, like, "I'm grand, I'm so drunk, ha ha ha," to assure him that she was okay at that point. And during the playing of the CCTV and after during the cross-examination from Remy Farrell, Conor McGregor's senior counsel, it emerged that she did send that message, but she didn't send it from the bedroom, and she didn't send it while she was with Conor McGregor. She sent it from the basement of the hotel when she was with James Lawrence after Conor McGregor and Danielle Keeley had left. So for me, that was kind of a big moment because, in the midst of large sections of the night or the day where she says, "I don't remember a lot of stuff," that was a very clear memory that she did say that she had. And yet a huge aspect of this very clear memory turned out not to be true. So that for me was quite an impactful moment.
Yeah, we had a lot of instances in the trial of people remembering things that seemed dubious. I mean, for me, just watching it from afar, for me, the thing that just lacked credibility was the evidence of James Lawrence, where he said that he had sexual intercourse with Danielle Keeley, I think, 3 times, and then a further 2 times with Nikita Hand, all in the space of a couple of hours while heavily intoxicated. And I think a lot of people raised an eyebrow at that assertion. So there seemed to me to be various moments in the trial where the evidence was counterintuitive, we'll put it that way. Laura, I know you've been following it very, very closely. I'll ask you the same question. Was there a moment that stood out for you?
Well, I think that there wasn't. I mean, I did follow it very closely. Obviously, I'm not in court like Fatima is, and you do. I know from experience, everybody loves to have an opinion on a court case, but unless you're actually there and can judge the demeanour of the witnesses as they give evidence, it is really difficult to judge. Ultimately, the jury are always best placed to say that. And I went through her evidence, and there were certainly, some issues with it. But I think it's important to remember that, the evidence is taken of it as a whole. There's not, there can be, you might spot one thing that you think that's really fatal to her account. But I mean, clearly the jury were not of that opinion. And I think also what will be lost by just, even if you've read it in great detail, which I have, and Fatima, you will have picked up, is the timeline. Because the whole events from, when they came into, can you go over the timeline again, Fatima? Because I definitely think it was lost in me, and I like to think I followed it in huge detail. But I mean, it took place over 24 hours or longer, 36 hours. It wasn't, it wasn't what I'm saying is, it wasn't a neat event if you were examining it from the point of view of the jury.
Right, absolutely. And I think it was like kind of confusing. Even like some of the other journalists who came in midway were very confused as to when is all this happening? But so on the 8th of December 2018, the staff of the Gerard Paul hair salons, there's two. There's one in Goatstown in South Dublin and there's one in Naas.
Yeah.
They went for a Christmas party at Airfield in Dundrum. So that's the 8th of December. After the Christmas party, they go to the Goat. I believe that's the famous thing, the Goat bar that is across the road from the salon. They go there and they're there basically into the 9th, into the morning of the 9th of December, Sunday. And at this point, that's where Conor McGregor comes into the picture. So they've started their festivities on the evening of the 8th. Then Danielle Keeley and Nikita Han meet Conor McGregor on the morning of the 9th. He said he got to the salon around 10 a.m. Then after that, he and the two girls drive around for a bit and they go to the home of James Lawrence. So then at 12 noon, same day, 9th, they arrive at the Beacon Hotel. They're at the Beacon Hotel until about 6 p.m., 6:30 p.m. on the 9th. So they're actually
going into the hotel at daytime, is that right? At a lunchtime, 12 noon.
Yeah. That's why it's so confusing, because you're thinking they're out all night.
Normally, you would think you went out at that night and they went back at, say, 1 or 2 a.m., right?
Yeah.
But, okay, so they've entered the hotel at lunchtime. Is that right? Is that what happened?
Basically, I think when the check-in opened, they went there. And then they checked, I don't want to say they checked out. Conor McGregor and Danielle Keeley left around 6:30, I believe, was the time. And then Nikita Han and James Lawrence stayed on.
So they've gone up to 6:30 p.m. and then Nikita Han and Lawrence have, broadly, they've said they've left. Now you're back into another night. When?
So all of this stuff, like all of the sexual stuff happens on the 9th. And then Nikita Han arrives home to her then partner Steve. I believe it was around midnight. So it would be midnight. We're into Monday now. And then her contact with the Rotunda Hospital starts on Monday. Yeah. So it's kind of Saturday, Sunday, Monday.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think what I'm just saying is, again, you do have to be there. And normally when you're dealing with an offence like that, you'll be dealing with a much tighter timeline. But this has gone on for, as you say, nearly the best part of 3 days. I mean, there wasn't anything hugely that stuck out. And I think you're always looking at the evidence cumulatively. And, there was obviously some that went for her and others that went against her, but clearly nothing was fatal to her case. And I think, looking back on it last night, rereading it last night, I think a big reason for that actually was the judge's directions to the jury, which were given now would have been very different to what they gave 10 years ago. I don't have them in front of me. But, so again, I think you were talking about her making phone calls and texts and things like that. And I think McGregor's team put a lot of emphasis on the CCTV and the lift and her being affectionate to Lawrence, right? I think that it seemed they made a lot of hay out of that. Am I right on that?
Oh yeah, they used what you could see, what the court could see was that, after Conor McGregor raped her, as the court accepted, that she was in the lift. She stayed on at the hotel with James Lawrence. She could be seen in the lift, going up and down in the lift, like she was hugging him, kind of caressing him, kissing him, and even one of the moments where the four of them were in the lift when Conor McGregor and Danielle Keeley were leaving, you can see, and like, you know, it's not a huge thing, I guess, but you can see that Conor McGregor kind of has his arms out and she is behind him and she kind of like places her lips on the kind of this part of his arm while he has his arms outstretched. And the defense did rely on that to say, look, you're saying this man just brutally raped and battered you. Why are you placing a kiss on the back of his arm? And they also were saying that in the CCTV, she had hugged one of the security guards. Now, there's an element from her salon manager, Emer Brennan, who is actually the first person not involved in the hotel party that she would have come in contact to after the rape. So she had the salon keys on her because, you know, herself and Danielle had stayed on into the early hours of the morning, and then Conor McGregor came and picked them up. She still has the keys. She needed to give them back to Emer Brennan in order for her to be able to open the salon. So she went to her home, and then she said that she did tell at first she had tried to go to the home of Jennifer Redmond, who I believe that was the sister of her then partner. But I think she wasn't able to get in contact with Jen. So instead she went to Emer Brennan. And at that point she told Emer Brennan what had happened. Yes. Emer Brennan took photos of her. Those photos were subsequently deleted at the request of Nikita Hand. And that was also something that the defense lied on pretty heavily. Like, you know, why did you have these photos deleted? Why did you ask people to delete text?
Yeah, I mean, I think, clearly that's what they have to do. But the other photographs were obviously very significant. And just in terms of, again, I think 10 years ago, this case would have been harder to prove. But if you go over the judge's directions, which I think were key, he does explain that, and these are relatively recent developments, that, you know, a victim of rape will react in different ways to that particular assault. And it shouldn't, you know, it's not the case that they're going to be sort of running down the street with their hands in their air, you know, crying for help. That if it's a traumatic event, you know, even in the immediate aftermath, you could react in all sorts of ways. And obviously there was alcohol and cocaine in play as well. So, I mean, what I'm saying is, yeah, you know, it certainly is something the defense can rely on, but I don't think it would have, it clearly hasn't had the impact, as I said, that something like that would have, say, 10 or 15 years ago with a jury, where they would probably be persuaded to say, well, no one would really react like that. But the judicial directions now are completely different in terms of, you know, not victim blaming, not stereotyping, and not relying on a very specific reaction to a very serious assault, which I think is fair enough.
Yeah, like the judge did mention, sorry, John, the judge did mention the legal concept of, I believe it's called hue and cry. Is that right, Laura?
Yeah.
Where
yes.
where, like, you know, a victim of rape, as you said, cannot be expected to go screaming, saying, oh my God, somebody just raped me. And he said that in the majority of cases, unfortunately, people are raped by people they know. So, you know, and obviously Nikita Hand was acquainted to some degree, not very intimately.
She's not been dragged off the street, I think is the point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go on, John.
I just want to move on to the medical evidence, because I think this was key. And I want to say, before we move on to the medical evidence, that obviously we're going to discuss matters here that if you experience sexual violence, we have to discuss it. So I'm not going to use the words trigger warning or anything like that, but just be aware that some of the content here is obviously upsetting. The court heard evidence from all parties in relation to the matter of tampon that Nikita Hand had been using, which became lodged so deeply within her that a doctor had to remove it using forceps. It heard evidence that she had, I think, a 2-centimeter vaginal tear. And it heard evidence from both parties, both Nikita Hand and Conor McGregor. She said that she would never willingly have sexual intercourse while on her period. And he said, for his part, he would never willingly have sexual intercourse with a woman who was on her period. Which, you know, that's an area where both of them, one of the rare areas where both of them seem to agree, actually. And Fatima, can you walk us through what the medical evidence was there? Was there any clear indication from any witness, you know, we don't think this is consistent with what Conor McGregor says it is, which is athletic, vigorous, prolonged sex in multiple positions? Or was the medical evidence persuasive in court, or how was it received?
Well, again, I wasn't there on the first day, so I didn't actually hear the testimony of the SATU doctor in person. But I do know, like, what you said is correct. Like, he did say that there was bruising on her neck, and that there was a tampon basically wedged close to the right side of her cervix, and that there was a vaginal tear. But he said that I think she may have needed stitches, but the decision was made that they would leave it to see if it would heal by itself. And he also said that during his examination of her, that he had to stop several times because she was in such a state of distress. And obviously, no brainer. You probably don't want to be touched at all. Never mind in that area after you've been raped. So, yeah, that was the evidence from the SATU sexual assault treatment unit at the Rotunda Hospital. Also, the paramedics who treated her at the scene, like, they came on the Monday morning to her mother's house. There was one lady, Ethna Scully is her name. I believe she has about 18 years experience working with Dublin Fire Brigade. And she said that the bruising on Nikita was something that she hadn't seen for a long time. She said that she was in a very distressed state when she came to her. In fact, it was a Neil Dempsey was the male paramedic who had found Nikita. He went into her mother's home where she was when the ambulance was called. Her mother called the ambulance, and that she was in the front room, and that she was wearing PJs, but he could see basically kind of this area that there was marks on her. And then the ambulance footage shows Nikita getting into the ambulance. Like, she's obviously a little bit hunched over. Like, she obviously looks like she's exhausted, like not well at all. And then she gets onto the stretcher, and she kind of lies down on her side. And you can see that Ethna Scully takes over then, because obviously, like, you're going to have, if there's a woman present, you're going to have a woman do that kind of initial, examination. And you can see that when they drive off, like, a Garda comes into the ambulance and he's talking to Nikita, and then when they drive off, she becomes quite distressed. And Niall Dempsey, Ethna Scully was driving, so Niall Dempsey would have been with her in the ambulance as they were driving through the rotunda. He says that she did have something that he felt was consistent with a panic attack. And you can see her kind of shifting around, like, she goes from the gurney or the trolley to this chair. There's chairs in the ambulance as well that are kind of like stuck to the side of it, and she's shifting around. She seems to be distressed, and then they arrive into the hospital and they bring her in, and then obviously she's examined by a Dr. Kane, and then she's also interviewed by An Garda Síochána in the at the hospital. Like, she tells them what happened. She won't tell them who did it, and she also didn't at that point identify Danielle Keeley to them.
Well, Laura, to turn to you, if I'm on the jury and I'm hearing the evidence that Fatima has just so vividly described, both obviously the nature of the injuries, the lodging of the tampon, and then the very clear signs of a panic attack, and I put that all together with the evidence I've heard from, I wouldn't have sex on my period, et cetera, and then I've got this guy, James Lawrence, saying, well, I actually had sex with her twice consensually after that. I'm not trying to ask you a leading question, but I'm just saying, if I'm on the jury hearing that evidence, I start to get very skeptical very quickly of James Lawrence's evidence. And what weight is normally put on sort of, the medical evidence versus the evidence of people's behavior, or is it purely a matter for the jury?
Well, I mean, it's obviously a matter for the jury, but I mean, the medical evidence must have been hugely persuasive here. I mean, the evidence doesn't lie. It's coming from doctors. The photographs would have gone before the jury. Fatima, I assume the photographs weren't shown to the courtroom of the bruising.
No, they weren't.
But the CCTV in the ambulance was played.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean it's obviously very persuasive. It's very close in terms of timing. And there was also, I mean, when I was reading this evidence, which is obviously pretty traumatic, even just from an objective point of view, I was. Can you just take me through the legal teams as well? So both, all the lead counsel, all the silks were all men, were they? For Nikita Hand, Conor McGregor's obviously was male. Yes, the senior counsel was male.
There was a lady on there was a lady on Conor McGregor's side, but she didn't do a whole lot of the arguments. Like she read out the requisitions once the jury had been instructed to begin their deliberations. But like Remy was doing most of the talking.
So she was a junior then, yeah. And then for Lawrence, it was a senior silk and another a female or a male junior as well.
With him, I think it was a man. Yeah, like only John Fitzgerald did any of the talking, and then Nikita's side, there were at least one female solicitor in court. But the men, there was John Gordon and what's the I can't remember, is Ray Boland. Yeah.
I mean, it's not so important from her team, but I definitely, I mean, I have to say this would be unusual in London not to have a female silk. I think to have two men cross-examining her, particularly in the medical evidence, is just tactically a problem. I mean, I'm not saying that they're not great lawyers. They definitely are. They'd be better than me. But it's just, if you walked into a courtroom in England, whether it was a civil or a criminal trial, there's just no way you'd have six men, like as a senior and junior, in a trial. I mean, it just wouldn't happen. And if there was a female junior there, it would have been better for her to have taken the cross-examination on, at least in relation to the medical evidence, because I just think it's bad form. You know, if you're talking about, I don't have sex in my period, or and you know, I was wearing a tampon, I would never have had sex in my period, to be cross-examined on that by a male barrister, and then the next male barrister gets up and does the same again. And I mean, it was 8 women on the jury. Yeah, and 4 men, is that right?
Yeah, 8 women, 4 men.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a terrible word to use, but in terms of optics, if you were you know, being tactical about it, like, this is a big error, I think, on their behalf. I mean, there must be, in fact, one of the complaints by very experienced female barristers in England is that they get pigeonholed into defending sexual offenders all the time, because that's sort of, you know, that's seen as a better, you know, tactically a better way to go. And a lot of them, after, you know, 10 years of defending this day in, day out, they've said, I've had enough. So it definitely thought that was a big difference between the jurisdictions. It's not a good idea to be lining the place up with male barristers, you know, cross-examining a woman in this way. I mean, in terms of James Lawrence and his evidence, I mean, I don't think it's going to say too far. I mean, we don't know exactly why the jury said there was didn't find against him. Obviously, you could argue that they thought it was consensual sex, but I think it's more likely that they accepted Nikita's Hand's case, namely that he was a patsy and a fall guy for McGregor. And I think if the DPP consider that he has perjured himself in providing a false statement to cover for him, that could be a problem for him, and actually could also be a problem for McGregor, because it's an offence to try and procure someone to make a false statement in relation to a trial.
Sorry, Fatima, I was going to return to this later on, but since you brought it up now, Laura, I might as well address it while we're on it. Obviously, there's going to be significant discussion over the next few days about the DPP's decision not to prosecute, not to take a case. Catherine Pearce is the Director of Public Prosecutions. And you said to me a couple of days ago that you thought that perhaps, and this is purely speculation, I'm not trying to say that you're saying anything definitive, but that perhaps the statements of Lawrence might have weighed heavily on the DPP in not making this a criminal case.
No, the DPP has said that. I mean, that was one of the I think I mean, that's what I read in the Irish Times. I don't think I'm wrong on that. I mean, I think they would have taken I mean, there's 2 problems. The first problem is obviously beyond reasonable doubt, which is the test in criminal trials is much higher than on the balance of probabilities, which is more likely than not. So there is a big difference between the 2 tests, and they've looked at the evidence as a whole, and they've put quite a bit of, I mean, it went through a review. They initially said no, and Nikita Hand asked again for a review, and it went out to senior counsel who examined it. And, you know, I know a lot of people on Twitter were like, did DPP have questions to answer? Well, I mean, they've answered it twice. They did the review. And I think they put weight both on the CCTV evidence and also definitely put weight on Lawrence's statement that they went on to have sex together. Now, if that has been rejected at a civil trial, I mean, I'm not to say that will be up to the guards to investigate that further and really question whether or not how likely that is to have happened. I mean, there are perjury offences out there, so that will be up to the guards to go behind that. And as I said, if McGregor, if the allegation is that McGregor has put him up to it, then he's guilty of an offence as well. If it goes to trial, obviously it's a much higher standard. So I think on balance, the DPP probably were right, and there always is a push to take these cases to trial. But on the other hand, it's not in the interests of alleged victims to be trying weak cases. If you can't put an alleged victim through that. If you can't charge because it's sort of maybe they'll get a conviction out of it. I mean, the test is clear; it has to be in the public interest and a realistic prospect of conviction. I assume that's the test here, and they've determined on the evidence that it isn't. But again, part of that was the statement that James Lawrence gave.
Okay, Fatima, I want to turn to you because you might say there were 4 dramatis personae in this suite. 3 of them were parties to the case. Nikita Hand, one of the 4, was suing 2 of the others, Conor McGregor and James Lawrence. The 4th person there was her colleague, although I don't think they worked at the same salon, Danielle Healy. Can you walk us through roughly what her evidence and account of the night was?
That's Danielle Keeley. Yeah, I think there was a bit of confusion. I thought it was Healy the first time I heard it, but one of the other journalists graciously informed me that it's Keeley. But yeah, her evidence was, that the crescendo of her evidence, which Judge Owens actually described as minimal, was that she didn't see or hear anything on that night that would have led her to believe that Nikita had been raped. So she said that she's acquainted with Nikita, like they weren't super close friends. Like they worked in different branches of the same salon and they would have seen each other on training days, like that kind of thing. And, when Remy Farrell did ask Nikita when she was on the stand, like, what is Danielle Healy like? Are you friends with her? And she said, like, well, we're not super close, but like, and he asked her, is she a nice person? And she said, she's a lovely person. So, and one of the other, I think a big question in the trial was, why the plaintiff didn't call on Keeley to give evidence if, she is, a friendly woman to her. You would think that if she was in the vicinity when something bad like that happened, that she might be one of the first people she would call on. But, in the end, she was, I believe, subpoenaed for the defense. And I did get the impression that she was quite reluctant to be there. I mean, obviously, she has to be subpoenaed. She was reluctant. But,
one can hardly blame her given the nature of the evidence that she was compelled to give. But that evidence was essentially that she had gone back to the room and she had an intimate relationship of sorts with James Lawrence, but had not had any contact herself with Conor McGregor. And did she say that but she said she didn't hear anything at all untoward in terms of the other 2 people in the room? No, and I mean, all three of them, like including Nikita Hand herself, had said that, even when this is after the rape, that she wanted to stay on. Like, Lawrence said that, McGregor said that, Keeley said that, and Nikita said herself that when she woke up and she saw that people were making moves to go home, she was kind of wondering, why is that? Do you not want to stay on and party more? So, yeah, like Danielle Keeley's evidence was that when she first made a statement to the Gardaí, actually, she said that there had been no sexual contact between herself and Lawrence. And then she said that it was once. And then, as you said earlier, he said it was 3 times. Like, there's kind of a big difference between once and 3 times. But I don't think the court placed a significant weight on that disparity. Another thing was that, Nikita's ex-partner, Steve, when she arrived home to him after all this happened, he
so somewhat unusually perhaps, recorded their conversation. And there was a 37-minute conversation between himself and herself when she got home. And she was obviously like in a distressed state. She was crying. She said like, I'm after being raped. But then he was like, by who? Like he obviously, any man who heard that about their girlfriend would be in bits. And he was, really, really curious to find out who had hurt her. And she wouldn't tell him. And then, in the course of that 30 minutes, like 37 minutes, she became quite angry, quite upset, telling him to F off multiple times and accusing him of not caring about her and only caring about who did it, etc. And then he said, well, look, you're after telling me that there were other girls there. And like, if this man's after hurting you, how do you know they're okay now? And she said, I don't care about them. I only care about me. Take from that what you will. But yeah, that was another, I would say, quite difficult moment of the trial. And like when Nikita Hand was on the stand, she did sob quite audibly during the playback of that recording. And I think the defense did ask the plaintiff, like, well, why didn't you get Steve here as a witness? And they said, well, we didn't need to because his immediate interactions with her are all here. We didn't need him to come. That was their answer to that question.
And obviously that relationship has since ended. And I think Nikita Hand has a new partner who spent the trial in her company. And I think she thanked him yesterday when it was over. So, I mean, who knows? Laura, I'm going to turn to you for a question about sort of all of this is very hard to break down in terms of what we know is that 4 people enter a room. We know it's agreed that there was some form of sexual contact between Conor McGregor and Nikita Hand. We know that ends with, Nikita Hand having verifiable injuries that are picked up in the sexual trauma unit. But it is also, it's just a matter of fact, as Fatima has alluded to, that in places her evidence was significantly contradictory. It conflicted, or her story changed over time. If you're in a criminal trial where you have a victim like that, where there are gaps in their story or there are contradictions in their story, to what extent is that kind of expected when there's trauma? And I thought it was interesting we didn't hear any kind of, that I'm aware of, maybe Fatima can correct me, any kind of psychological evidence in the trial about somebody's state of mind.
There was.
Do you think that's,
I think there was evidence in relation to her suffering post-traumatic stress syndrome. But I mean, in terms of, on one hand, it's a complicated case, but on the other hand, and the judge did put it very clearly in his directions, it is a question, especially when the test is on the balance of probabilities more likely than not. It is a question of just who do you believe? And in any trial, or even when you're recounting any story, it's never the case that these stories are exactly how they're recounted. That's just not how human nature works. So, yes, there will be mistakes. Yes, you're going to say something that on balance a jury might think, well, I don't really believe them on that. But the question is it really fatal to what she is saying? She's saying she was brutally raped she said, and it was accepted, she was brutally raped by Conor McGregor. And there's and there was incredibly strong medical evidence to say that. And he has said it was all consensual. And I mean, it is a question of who you believe. Yes, there might be certain weaknesses in her case, but clearly none of them were fatal. And even just going back to the co-worker, it's true that she said, I think she said there was nothing that she saw or heard that would say that it was rape. But on the other hand, she wasn't a direct eyewitness. And as has been said a lot in rape cases, and the judge may have said it in this, there is no requirement for her or for Nikita Hand to have cried out when she was being attacked. Okay, so the co-worker didn't hear anybody crying out that, I'm being raped. So what? That doesn't mean that Nikita's hand wasn't raped, because she didn't have a choice. He's a lot bigger than her, and he essentially pinned her to the bed, and she's just, as often happens, gives up halfway through because her injuries will be worse if she fights him off than if she doesn't. Like, that's the logical calculation that she's made, and she's been completely correct in that. I mean, her injuries were bad enough with the initial fight off. So the fact that there's someone else in a room somewhere, not in the room, but in a different room, that didn't really hear anything and there was nothing that jumped out of her. Again, it doesn't add really anything to the case. So that is probably the reason the jury will have discussed it briefly, perhaps, and then just said, well, it doesn't add anything either way. It doesn't help Nikita Han, but it certainly isn't fatal to her. It's consistent. What I'm saying, it's consistent within Nikita Han's account as a whole, and it's the same with the CCTV evidence, because who knows how anybody would react, But what is very consistent with Nikita Han's evidence is her own evidence, the fact that she's complained essentially the next day, and obviously the medical evidence. And what has McGregor to say? It was all consensual, and I noticed that and actually, Fatima, I'd like to know what his demeanour was on the stand. And as I said, I don't think you can ever underestimate the amount of weight a jury will put on a witness's demeanour. But in the Irish Times, I think this was Miriam Lord, where two separate people after McGregor gave evidence said, I need to take a shower after that. So that to me says that McGregor came across very badly on the witness stand.
Before Fatima asked that, I just want those two other things that I thought were notable. Fatima, maybe you can address these. First of all, I think one of your colleagues reported that there was an audible intake of breath from the front row of the jury when Conor McGregor referred to the two ladies in question as two lovely ladies. And secondly, I thought notable that in the judge's instructions to the jury, he mentioned on several occasions that they were to disregard any personal dislike of Conor McGregor. That all points to me, all of both what Laura has said and what I've just repeated to you, that this was not his finest hour on the witness stand. Is that fair, or did you perceive something different?
I didn't hear the jury take an intake of breath. I'm not sure where that lady was sitting in the court, but just for reference, like, the jury were on the left side, then most of the journalists were on the right side, and I was kind of in the overflow area, which was right in the middle. So I was kind of seeing everything, and from that perspective, I didn't notice an intake of breath. I was very aggressively taking notes, so maybe that might have distracted me. But if I can just for a second, if I can kind of take us back into the penthouse, there was a door. There are doors, so the penthouse essentially was two rooms that there's interconnecting doors with, and then I guess if you book it as the penthouse, the staff open up the doors, so then it looks like kind of a sitting room, a living room area, and a bedroom area, as opposed to just one of each. So the doors was a huge feature of the entire trial. Was were the doors open? Could they be closed? Could they be locked? What state were they in during the time that the four were there? And, McGregor and Lawrence said that although McGregor and Hand would have been in a different room, that it was essentially 3 to 4 feet from where James and Danielle would have been the whole time. So that's obviously why the doors was such a big issue, because I guess, the defense were trying to make out, look, if she had been raped, you would have heard something. You more than likely could have seen something. And both James Lawrence and Danielle Keeley said that during the time where she was in the room with McGregor, that she was coming out. I think Keeley said that she had come out to get drinks that were in the sitting room part. So that's just to explain in context why the door was such a contentious issue during the trial. Sorry, what did you ask me after that, John?
McGregor's demeanour on the stand.
Oh, demeanour, right. He seemed quite normal at first. He seemed, he obviously has a bit of an aura about him. Like, he's, I don't know. I don't really follow it. Like, I'm not a sports fan. I know who he is, but I'm not too familiar with his what would you say, like his exploits or whatever. But he has certainly a kind of a posture, let's say. Mm-hmm. At first he seemed okay, I would say, but then during the course of the cross-examination. I think, if I'm correct, it was about the time when John Gordon, SC for Nikita Hand, asked him, why didn't you give your phone to the Gardaí? And I think at that point he became quite agitated, I would say. And he said, they didn't ask for it, was his answer. And then John Gordon said, okay, well, why didn't you volunteer it? And he said, like, look, well, the phone was nothing got to do with it. And then he basically said, look, if you want the phone, you can have it, pal. That's no problem. So at that point, he was, quite agitated. And then he went into a bit of a tirade, or like a bit of a monologue about how he was saying that he was saying that the trial was the first time that he was able to address the public as to what he says happened, that he wanted all of the evidence aired. He said that he wanted to go to the top of a mountain and scream the evidence through a microphone. And he said that, like, well, where's the evidence? And where's the evidence of what happened between Nikita and James in the taxi that they got into? And he basically,
this was the sucking his dick in the back of a taxi comment.
Yes, he made that comment, at which point Judge Owens instructed him to restrain his remarks. So that was probably, and he also used words to describe Nikita. Like, he said that she was bombastic. When she got into when she got into his car, when he went to pick them up, he said that she was like bombastic and energetic and enthusiastic. And he used all these kind of colorful words to describe the demeanor, mostly of Nikita, but also a little bit of Danielle as well.
Laura, I'm going to just say this and introduce this. This isn't necessarily a legal point, but maybe, because I'm thinking of this, I'm not a lawyer, I'm thinking, but if I was on the jury judging this, and I would say to myself, Conor McGregor wants to go to the top of a mountain and shout the evidence. Well, the evidence at minimum, if your side of the case is to be believed, is that with your long-term partner and children at home, you're cruising around, picking up random women, going back and having violent, aggressive sex with them in an apartment and then dropping them home, which of course not a crime, but it's not the kind of evidence an ordinary man would shout from the rooftops or go to the top of the Dublin mountains to shout. Did you think, reading the evidence, that he did himself favours on the stand? Because I didn't. I have to say, reading it as Fatima was reporting it live, I thought, this guy's not coming across well.
Yeah, well, I mean, it often is the case that you have, a client you'd rather not have. And I mean, the beginning, they're always fine in the beginning when they're being led through their own evidence by their own counsel. It's when they're cross-examined and the opposing counsel starts putting pressure on them and starts turning the screw. That's when you really get to examine what they're saying. I mean, from what I've read, he came across as very badly, and it's telling that his counsel in his closing speech was like, please don't hold it against him that you won't really like him, which, look, is often said. But if it's like the first thing you're getting out there, I think it says a lot. I think he was casting very serious aspersions on her character. He was implying that she would slept with other women that weekend. I just think it was all pretty nasty. And I would say that if a jury sitting back there, looking at this guy, as I said, he wasn't doing himself any favors. And I'm not in the courtroom, but I suspect her counsel just fed him enough rope to hang himself with, which is sometimes the best way to go. You not to necessarily put him under loads of pressure with loads and loads of questions, but just to let the jury see what kind of person you're dealing with. Now, of course, him being not a nice person is certainly not sufficient to either convict or in a criminal trial or indeed find against him in this trial. But again, they've taken the evidence as a whole. They've looked at both parties in the witness box, and it feeds into the idea, well, what's more likely or not, that he's violently assaulted her. He seemed to lose his temper pretty quickly. Or that she's just consented and changed her mind afterwards. I mean, it's just not likely that she's done that, which is why they've accepted her version of events.
Fatima, talk us through the closing arguments from both sides, because I'm interested. I know, and that the the phrase that stuck out with me from Remy Farrell when he was closing on behalf of Conor McGregor was kind of islands of evidence. But did he kind of paint a story? Did he, or maybe that was the prosecution who referred to Remy Farrell asking people to focus on islands of evidence. Did he kind of paint a narrative of what had happened, a version of events that kind of cast aspersions on Nikita Hand's, motives for taking the case? Or was it very clinical? You haven't met the balance of probabilities here. What was his approach?
I think that the gold digger accusations were made more in the course of the trial itself, and I mean particularly the plaintiffs, Nikita Hand's representatives, had an estate agent come in and essentially price a new house for her, on the grounds that she can no longer live in kind of Crumlin, Drimna, where she's from, because of all this. And I think
the court did hear evidence in the absence of a trial that her house had been in the absence of the jury, that her home had been invaded, and that wasn't put before the jury. But I think that was just important to mention that. I think but yeah. So she was saying, for example, that she wanted a new house because she could no longer live in that area, and obviously the jury didn't award those damages.
No, they didn't award exemplary or aggravated damages. So that was essentially the gold digger or whatever that accusation was made more during the course of the trial, I would say. But the closing arguments from Remy Farrell were he was very much pleading almost with the jury, don't send him down because he's Conor McGregor. Like, don't find against him because you think he can afford a few $100K. Like, don't find against him because you don't like the words he uses. You may not like the man, but that doesn't make him a rapist. Like, that was his line. And he did refer to islands of truth, saying that, basically that the CCTV doesn't lie, and just pleading with them to, basically look at the CCTV. The CCTV doesn't lie, and maybe use that as your reference point to see if the other evidence makes sense or not. And
that only works.
He was asked.
Yeah, that only works if you're using that old style view of how someone should react after a traumatic event. So he's saying the CCTV doesn't lie, which is obviously true. But he's already assuming that they will then agree with him that no one would react the way she has in the CCTV. And I mean, the judge then goes on to direct them to say, well, we don't know how anybody would react. In fact, don't put that much emphasis on what you're saying. So, I mean, again, I think that's a big problem for his counsel.
Well, the viewers, some viewers will. Sorry, Fatima, I'm going to interject you on because no, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. It's just say that, Laura, some viewers will obviously have a question. Conor McGregor has said he's going to appeal.
Yes,
he said that publicly now on a number of occasions since the verdict has come in. My understanding, and perhaps you can tell me if I'm wrong, is that in these circumstances, an appeal is only available to him if he can prove that the judge erred in a point of law, in how he conducted the trial, or in how he instructed the jury. So I don't want to ask you what you would do in that situation, but is it possible, for example, that Conor McGregor's lawyers might be looking at the instructions to which you refer, and saying, look, our case was all about the CCTV and she didn't behave as we think somebody in those circumstances should have done.
I don't think that's a misdirection in law. I mean, the legal directions are quite tight. I mean, that is my understanding as well, is you can only appeal if there was an error law. Now, I could be wrong on that. But unless it was, and I mean, I don't know how many legal arguments without the jury were made. I mean, there was a few. So it's either, an error in law in directing the jury, or a previous argument to be made. I know Lawrence's counsel asked for the case to be withdrawn from the jury, but obviously he's not going to appeal because he wasn't found. So unless he's made a legal decision during the trial that proves to be erroneous, or, as I said, a misdirection to the jury, I think his avenue for appeal is limited. But people, if you are on a crusade and you've got money to fund it, who knows what will come out. But I mean, I did think, John, I don't know if you want to bring out, I mean, there's already political fallout from this. I did notice that the politicians now, well, obviously the questions are being put to them, but they seem to be falling over themselves to to say what a great win this was for Nikita Hand and how courageous she was. And she certainly was courageous. But I think it's slightly unfair of them to say that, because this was a case brought by her, a huge personal risk to her in terms of carrying the cost if she lost it. The state apparatus arguably failed her because the DPP decided not to prosecute. And I know Helen McEntee today said that there was an epidemic of domestic and sexual violence in this country. And there is no doubt about that. Well, if that's what she believes, then, I mean, the obvious question then is what is she going to do about it? I mean,
what has she done about it?
Yeah.
Like, come on.
What's the plan? And why has she waited until now?
What is the plan?
She's just waited for this, as I said, what is essentially a private case with a huge personal risk to Nikita Hand. But now Helen has woken up today on Saturday, the 23rd of November, and has decided there's an epidemic of sexual and domestic violence in the country. You didn't think that a month ago? And what's changed now? And what are you going to do about it?
Absolutely. And I mean, I think it's worth noting that the only reason we know Nikita Hand's name is that she took this case privately. Because obviously if the DPP had prosecuted, the usual rules about victims' right to anonymity would apply. And in essence, she's been named and everything that happened to her, and she's been publicly identified because she had to take the case as a citizen. Fatima, we're getting close to kind of wrapping this up. I'm gonna just go to you and ask you for your general. What was it like? Because I know, because obviously you and I work very closely together, and I think you did an absolutely phenomenal job. I want to put that on the record. But what was it like to be sitting there every day? It's obviously the content is explicit. It's at times cruel. It's harsh. There are people crying all day. Like, did you find it personally tough to sit through it?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, I think that, this job is not always pleasant, and I think you have to have a certain ability to detach yourself from a situation that's happening in front of you in order to do it and do it accurately and fairly. So I definitely tried to engage, put on that hat, like my journalist hat. But yeah, obviously, like, the on a human level, it's really difficult to see a woman telling a jury, and not you also, I mean, you're also there, you're the eyes and ears too, that she thought she was going to die, and that she had her daughter's face in front of her thinking, I need to let him do what he wants to do so I can go home to my child. And I won't say her child's name. I think, I just for privacy reasons, viewers might already know what it is.
Laura, you and I talk fairly regularly, once every couple of days or so, about work. And this trial has come up. And you know that I've been saying to you, I've been basically going back and forth every day as it was going on, because we could discuss the thing privately, couldn't discuss them in public. Where I was like, no, I think I believe him, I believe her. And I think you and I disagreed repeatedly through the trial. Often we both on opposite sides one day or the other. Like, what will you take away from what has undoubtedly been the most high-profile civil rape action in the history of the state?
Well, the two tests are different.
Cultural points to make
between the civil and criminal standard. Look, you're definitely seeing, sort of the dark side of human nature. I mean, particularly from him. Look, Nikita Hand is entitled to go out and have a good time, and she was very clear on that. And I think it's always easy to sort of judge in the cold light of day. But I mean, I think, she's raising a young daughter on her own, and there's probably pressures in relation to the job. Everybody is entitled to go out and enjoy themselves. And the fact that, she has ended up being brutally assaulted and raped like this, I mean, it's terrible. That punishment for her, irrelevant of what her compensation will be. I mean, she'll never get over that. And when her daughter, I mean, she thanked her daughter explicitly outside court. And I suspect that a lot of this was motivated by the fact that she has a young daughter and she doesn't want to see this kind of injustice go on again. But eventually her daughter will grow up and will have to read all of this and will know all the details of it. I mean, God knows what was, who knows what would have been being said in the playground. As I said, I don't know the age, but I mean, it's an incredibly, I don't think I could have done it. It was a huge personal financial risk, but the moral courage it took to do this, I think, is really genuine. And I'm a pretty cynical person. I think personally it's something you'd never get over. And I think she, it is moral courage is rare, and she has definitely displayed it. She's just an ordinary person, she's a very, very ordinary person. And this is going on, this has taken up 5 years of her life. So I don't think it should underestimate, how difficult this would have been. And she must have had a huge, a really good support network around her. And yeah, I mean, it's, as I said, I'm a pretty cynical person, but she has shown huge moral courage in this.
Laura, I'm going to ask you one final question before we go, which is this. I mean, obviously, this is kind of a landmark case in one respect, in that it is a civil action claiming rape where no criminal offence has been proven. Kind of a unique prosecution. I don't think we've ever had one of its nature in Ireland before. I mean, do you think it could become a groundbreaking case where there are more? Obviously, we know from the criminal courts that rape is one of the hardest crimes to prove, and all the statistics show that. Do you think that there will be people out there? I'm not saying, certainly lawyers looking at this going, this might be there might have been new legal ground broken here in terms of getting accountability for victims. Well,
perhaps, but I think it is wrong to put it on to put it in on her on the victims, or on the victim's shoulders. As I said, because it is a huge personal financial risk, because costs follow the event. If she loses it, she would have had to have covered his costs. That would be the normal course of events. And also, I mean, it's really important. This isn't a sort of a private dispute really between two private people. That's what a civil case is. But if somebody is violated in this way, yes, of course, the wrong is towards them individually. But again, it's also a societal wrong, in that there is either structurally or culturally within a society that a woman could be attacked like that. So it should be for the DPP to prosecute. It should be the state that is prosecuting the wrong on behalf of the victims. I think it would be regressive if it was left for victims themselves to settle these disputes. But obviously you have to fulfill the test, and because of the nature of rape, evidentially it can be difficult to prove, but certainly not impossible.
Okay, I'm going to close by noting that the Rape Crisis Centre says that in the days following the trial, they've had a 50% increase in what they describe as first-time calls, and obviously to encourage anyone who has been traumatised by the events of the last couple of weeks, or indeed anything we've discussed today, to pick up the phone and talk to somebody about it, if need be. Fatima, thank you so much for all your work over the last couple of weeks. Laura, thank you very much for joining us today and your ongoing analysis. Folks, thank you very much for joining us and listening to this discussion. We'll be back in the future with more discussions, but for now, over and out. Thank you.